This is a very important day as we digest the Mueller report. The president today doubling down on his criticism of that probe after yesterday declaring game over ahead of the release of the report, saying there was no collusion, there was no obstruction. And now the president taking aim at the report's contents, tweeting, quote, "Statements are made about me by certain people in the crazy Mueller report, in itself written by 18 angry Democrat Trump haters, which are fabricated and totally untrue. Watch out for people that take so-called notes when the notes never existed until needed, because I never agreed to testify. It was not necessary for me to respond to statements made in the report about me, some of which are total BS, and only given to make the other person look good or me to look bad," end quote. And the White House today saying Mueller's team was not able to find wrongdoing despite a massive effort. Watch.
2,800 subpoenas, 500 witnesses, 500 warrants, 40 FBI agents, 19 attorneys, a partridge in a pear tree, and we all now know exactly what the president has been saying was 100% true. There is no collusion, no obstruction, a complete and total exoneration, and the poor American people were lied to for 2+ years by the mainstream media, and someone's got to answer for that.
And the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, saying the president was treated unfairly.
The presumption of innocence, and it's not just a joke. I mean, the reality is, in this case, he really was innocent, but he certainly should be presumed innocent. He doesn't have to prove his innocence. He doesn't have to prove I didn't do it. When can you prove a negative? We were very fortunate in the collusion situation that it is so crazy, so nutty, made up, and boy, you know, that better be investigated. This didn't come out of thin air.
All right, so depending on which side of the aisle you're on, you're going to read the report very differently. We knew that from the get-go. Obviously, the president and his team is focusing on the collusion aspect, and Democrats are focusing on obstruction. Rudy Giuliani, one of the people on the president's legal team who convinced him not to sit for an interview with special counsel, was that the right move?
Oh, of course, it was exactly the right move. I think Rudy taking the legal side of this focuses on what Andy McCarthy, I think, justifiably says, which is that this started out not as a criminal investigation. I mean, it was a counterterrorism operation originally, or an operation against the Russians. Not necessarily, there was no crime to begin with. Therefore, it was a hunt for a crime. Now, the president called it a witch hunt, but it certainly was a hunt for a crime. And that's what the Mueller report seems to document. A look for where was the crime? Where was the crime? Where was the crime? You're supposed to start with a crime and then find evidence that either proves or disproves that this person was responsible for that crime. But it didn't. The president clearly is furious about having been accused of something he did not do. That's one thing that the Mueller report was absolute on. There was no intentional collusion between anybody in the Trump administration and the Russians. That he was absolutely cleared of, and he was, time after time, for 2.5 years, everybody in the Democrat Party and 98% of the media was saying that this is absolute. He's furious about that. And I think most Americans, it does appeal to Americans' core when one gets angry about being unjustifiably accused of something.
Yeah, it does appeal to that sense of justice, that longing that we have. And I think that's what the president's team would wisely focus on if they're going to continue focusing on this. Maybe they should just move on. However, it's impossible for Congress to do that because the way the report is laid out, there's 182 pages dedicated to obstruction. And it seems as though special counsel abdicated the responsibility to either prosecute or decline, and almost left that up to Congress, sort of extending the process. Was that intentional? And if so, was it cruel?
I mean, it certainly seems like a knife to President Trump, because it seems like he's getting the Jim Comey treatment, right? What he did to Hillary Clinton, because ultimately former federal prosecutors like Andy McCarthy saying that this is not the way it's supposed to be done. If you can't find enough evidence of a crime committed to indict, you leave it alone. And he didn't. And Andy McCarthy accused him of a smear, and even worse, flouting the Constitution. So this is, you know, inarguably unfair to President Trump. But on a legal matter, this is over for President Trump on both the collusion front and the obstruction of justice front. Now, he's obviously going to face, political retribution from Democrats on this issue, but he was going to anyways, even before the Mueller report came out. Remember, the Oversight Committee issued 81 document requests to 81 individuals. We knew that Democrats weren't going to let this go. And to be honest, President Trump is going to keep pushing this angle too, especially the origins of the investigation, because what do we have coming out? We've got the Inspector General report coming out about FISA abuse. We also know that Attorney General Barr is also looking into the origins of the investigation, spying and things of that nature. So he's going to have
Huber as well.
He's going to have some fodder
as the
there.
president has said, investigating the investigator. So we've had a full day to digest the report. Where is the president cleared, and where is he in trouble based on that digestion?
Well, you've already touched on the volume 2, the obstruction of justice, which we will get into further detail later in the show on that. I think as someone who carries a grudge, I still have the name of a kid from 2nd grade written on a little slip of paper that's in my wallet.
We all do. You're right.
Who hit me and knocked
Keeps
me
me
out.
up at night.
See, Kat is feeling
I
me.
don't, but I'm not crossing anyone on this couch, I guess.
I don't expect President Trump to stop ranting and raving and wailing about this on Twitter anytime he's in front of a microphone. I think that the anger is very clear in the volume 2 of the Mueller report under the obstruction issue. You mentioned Rudy Giuliani, one of the individuals who made sure that the president didn't sit down for an interview with the Mueller team. So smart, because again, process crimes is what they get you on. Lying to federal investigators, a felony. But I think that, and the Mueller report says, the president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his request. It was Don McGahn in multiple instances refusing to dismiss the Bob Mueller. Corey Lewandowski and Rick Dearborn did not deliver the president's message to Jeff Sessions about you're only going to investigate future election meddling. I could go on, including the president's legal team. The question now is, does the president still have around him people who will protect him from himself, who will push back against his worst
That's a really good point, because you would assume that a lot of these people who are listed in this report as pushing back against the president, you would assume that a lot of them were yes men and women, but apparently that's not the case. What does that say about the process and the system around the president and sort of the unspoken rule that you push back and don't always give in to the crazy?
Right. I think that that's a great thing. I think that it's very dangerous for anyone to have only yes men around them. And the thing about this report is the way that the president is responding, you'd think that it was, completely flattering, which it was not completely flattering. There were a lot of people in the White House that were doing some things they shouldn't have been doing. However, the media and Democrats did Trump and the White House the biggest favor they possibly could have done by the way that they covered this. Do you remember, David, they were saying treason, they were saying traitor.
Well, they're still saying it.
And they're still saying it, but they made it seem so extreme that he was like actually an agent of the Russian government. So if you're saying
Andrew McCabe said that a month ago when he was on his book tour.
Right.
He said it's very possible that the president is a Russian asset.
Right. So if you have the bar being set at that level, this comes out looking like the teeniest, tiniest potatoes in the world. I'm talking very little potatoes. And I think that people would be more likely to be more critical of the negative things that were in the report had they not set the bar where they set it.
I agree with that, but I don't think for a second that if President Trump wanted to fire Mueller, he would have done it, right? And that's the whole point of having counsel around you and advisors to advise you and also to appeal to your better angels, right? And President Trump has had no problem firing anyone. He legit fired James Comey.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about.
He would have done it if he wanted to do it.
Don McGahn.
The White House gave Mueller unfettered access to officials. 1.4 million documents. I've submitted questions.
I know.
Can
I just please speak? Don McGahn refused to recede to his recollections about events surrounding the president's direction to have the special counsel removed, despite the president's multiple demands that he do so. That was one of the things that I was talking about. The president said, "Oh, you need to remember." What was discussed, and that didn't happen. So again, listen, he was surrounded by people who protected him and prevented him from getting into trouble.
And he let Don McGahn sit down
by the way,
for 30
as are
hours.
all presidents. I mean, Dana Perino was talking, even GW, even mild-mannered GW Bush needed to have some pushback from his staff. Dana said there was a 3-question rule. If he asked 3 questions, the president, then the third time you'd follow what he asked and follow up on it. But just to your point, Kat, about the obsession continuing even past the Mueller report, the New York Times calls this, Michelle Goldberg writing today, "We continue to underreact to our government's transformation into an authoritarian junta."
If they consider that an underreaction, I'd hate to see what an overreaction or even a regular
well, it's
reaction.
very interesting because that's how the New York Times is categorizing it. Yet Bernie Sanders won't call Nicolas Maduro a dictator.
Right.
And this is a person who's lording over an actual junta.